You ever talk to someone who says, I don't know what's wrong with me? And you get the sense they don't really want to know what's wrong with them? Uh, I remember the first time I experienced something like that. It was performance anxiety in my teens. I had gone to bed with a woman and wasn't able to get it up. And I really wanted to know why I had failed. But at the same time, I didn't want to know. I just wanted the truth. But I hoped it was flattering. I hoped it was affirming. So I had this kind of deep ambivalence about knowing. I now think that that's the human condition. That is, we don't really want to know what's going on with us. I've been noticing it these days. I've been calling it autophobic agnostics. Autophobia is fear of self-knowledge. And agnosticism is that kind of tolerant attitude where you leave it an open question. What are we? It makes for stimulating debate and wonderful conversation, and you can change your mind. It's flexible. It's more of a playground than it is a science. You're not really trying to find out what's going on with us humans. You wouldn't want to know, and for understandable reasons. We need our self-unawareness. We need to not know what we are. We can't afford to be observing ourselves, second-guessing ourselves, being self-conscious all the time. So, of course, we would have these aversions to knowing ourselves, aversions to real self-awareness. When we talk about someone as self-obsessed, we don't mean that they are obsessed with who they really are. Someone who's self-obsessed is usually someone who is obsessed with a flattering version of who they are. Like think about a narcissist. Well, the thing that's hardest to do with a narcissist is to get them to look at themselves, which is interesting given that they're narcissists. No, they're not looking at themselves. They're looking at a flattering version of themselves. So there are lots of reasons why we humans would say, I just want the truth, but it better be flattering. Or if it isn't flattering, I'd rather not know it. I'd rather keep it an open question, which is what I mean by autophobic agnosticism. Autophobic is fear of self-knowledge. But there's also a possibility that by now the world is in tough enough shape that we kind of have to look at who we are. We have to finally face up to who we are. And since that's been a focus for me, trying to understand what we really are, setting aside my preferences, not caring whether it's flattering or not, just trying to understand what we are as creatures. We are certainly creatures. We're organic creatures. We're evolved creatures. Notice how much aversion there was to even that exposure. The idea that we are actually, by our best, most realistic, most unbiased account, evolved organisms. Think of how much aversion there was to knowing that unflattering story about that. So that points to our aversion to knowing ourselves. And what I'm saying here is, if we were actually pressed now, let's say that life is getting a little apocalyptic around here, it would probably be a good idea for us to size up who we are really instead of just sticking to our flattering stories. In fact, some of those flattering stories are why we're in this apocalyptic state. All the holy warriors out there who are sure that they've got the answer and have transcended whatever animal nature we might have. And, the ideologues, the idealists, and all of those kinds. Those are people who precisely are really avoiding knowing who we are. So let's just say we want to step back and assess what we really are as plainly as possible. And it's not going to be enough to say that we evolved. Yes, of course we evolved. All organisms evolved. But that doesn't actually really explain much about what we evolved into. So I want to get a little more specific and yet still stay quite general. This is my interpretation of what we really are. We call us Homo sapiens, but I actually think a more apt term is Fomo sapiens. Fear of missing out is intense in humans in a way that it isn't for any other organism. What do I mean by that? We can imagine all sorts of possibilities. We can do what ifs, if onlys, and we can idealize. We can imagine the fulfillment, the steady, solid fulfillment of all of our preferences. Heaven, Mrs. or Mr. Right. The ideal, the romantic ideal of happily ever after. This is who we are. And since we don't have it here on Earth, We're doing a lot of rubbernecking around to see who has reached the pinnacles of that kind of happily ever after success. And how do you get there? How do you get there? So you're on your paths in your life. You have the paths that you're stuck on, but you're kind of rubbernecking around looking to see if you can find the path that will bring you to this happily ever after. This would all be a function of the human capacity to conceptualize, which I'll argue no other organism does. And it's very straightforward how we have come by it. It's not about consciousness or self-awareness per se. Those are descriptions of it, but let's just talk about what it practically is. All organisms can do variations on the Pavlov's dog thing. That is, if they have repeated examples of something, similar things, like bells, they can make an association, either by evolution or by learning, between that repeated thing and a repeated response to it, that is, eating. This is what we'd call iconicity and indexicality. Iconicity is similarity, so if you have a bunch of different similar experiences, and indexicality is that they point to a certain behavior. So this would be true of all organisms to some extent or another. This includes plants. That is, plants have evolved a way of dealing with the repeated cycles of changes of season, for example. And then animals can learn the way Pavlov did. But we're doing something different. Humans are doing something different, and it's different from all the other organisms we know. It's not unique to us because we're some kind of special hotsy-totsy creature. It could happen anywhere in the universe. It could happen to another organism. It's not anthropomorphic snobbery or chauvinism when I say this. I'm talking about a different process of interpretation that we call symbolic. So the way symbols work is you got a culture that maintains some repeated gestures, but they're arbitrary. They don't point directly to something the way that the bell is heard by the dog and points to food immediately in front of it. These are arbitrary. We call them tokens. So let's say you take a string of letters, okay? And society maintains a convention by which that string of letter refers to a string of something else, or to a concept, to an idea. We can work in concepts because we have terms like dog or freedom or well-being or utopia or disappointment, all of these terms that are held by society that we learn, we assimilate them in childhood and then can mix and match them to imagine anything. And among the things we would imagine is utopias and missing out on them. I had pretty intense FOMO when I was growing up. I had an interesting experience, therefore, when my father was dying. It was sad. I loved him a lot, and it was local, and I was with him. But there was also a peace of mind about it. I knew I was in the right place. There was obviously no place else I should be. I was not scrambling for a path to success the way I was 24/7 the rest of my life, my anxious mid-30s. Trying to figure out what to do, how to maneuver to happily ever after. No, when my dad was dying, that was the obvious priority. That was the place to be, and I could relax. I was confident that I was where I belonged. So imagine for a FOMO experiencing creature like us, creatures that can imagine the ideal, imagine feeling inadequate because we haven't reached the ideal, imagining finding the path to the ideal or to some variation on it. Just imagine what we would dream of as the ideal. It would be the kind of peace of mind I experienced for those few days as my dad was passing. And it would be a sense of invincibility. The way I think about it is that it's like the dream of finding a express train to happily ever after. And how when you're on that express train, you ain't go to sleep. You don't have to worry. Nothing. You're not vulnerable in any way. You're not vulnerable to being on the wrong path, heading in the wrong direction, having to deal with some doubt about which way to travel. You're on an express train. It's guaranteed to take you where you want. So there's a feeling of safety and freedom. You can do whatever you want because the express train will take you there. And a feeling, it's the opposite. It's the antidote to fear of missing out, is comfortable that you're in the right place exactly where you belong and that there's no decisions to be made. As a result, you would feel kind of invincible, like nothing could ever hurt you. And one more personal example of this. You'll be able to relate to this. So you're at a party and you end up in a conversation, let's say because of who you came with, and you're feeling kind of shy. The other people around you are impressing you, or at least they know about something you don't know about. And so you're kind of looking for how to hold your face so you look cool and relaxed, but you're actually a little bit anxious. You're feeling a little vulnerable. It could be that you're about to, maybe they'll ask you a question and you won't know the answer, or you'll come up with some brain fart stupid answer and you'll lose your reputation with these people, and you'll be subjected to that sensation that you did miss out, that you should have been better prepared for a situation like this, that you're actually not one of the cool ones who's on the path to success. You're actually one of the losers. You're at risk of feeling inadequate, which would be part of feeling the fear of missing out, is that you missed the boat. You're not on the path to success. Imagine how intense that feeling could be, and imagine how intense it could be for people who experience it a lot because they have missed out. They're education deprived, they're disabled, they're culturally different from their local community, they're an outcast, they're at constant fear of being exiled. Think about the history of exiles, sending people away, outcasts. Think of the terror of being thrown out of your tribe or thrown out of any tribe. Just being the outcast is no fun because it stirs all these fear of missing out anxieties that humans would have. That you can imagine the ideal, you haven't reached it, and then you get some, in effect, death warrant, a social death warrant that you don't belong. So when I think about how humankind would be reacting to conditions like today's, for one thing, it's a hard world to maintain your conviction that you're on the right path. It's a hard world for that. I think of us as conviction impaired. It's harder to maintain your sense that you have the only one true right express train to happily ever after. Because you look around and there's a bunch of other people who have their express trains, and the competition is thick, and therefore there's a lot of putting each other's express train down. That's one way that I can feel better about my express train, is to think that yours is a joke. You think you're on the express train to heaven, you're on the express train to hell. So there's a lot of taunting back and forth, and for that reason, we're very conviction impaired. And imagine in that state, someone comes along who's not really trying to do anything but one thing. He's trying to demonstrate that you will never have to feel inadequate again. You will never have to learn anything to avoid feeling inadequate. You will never have to feel FOMO ever again. You can feel like you are on the express train to heaven, and you can do it without having to learn anything other than just some boilerplate cliches that you can say, let's say in that potentially embarrassing cocktail party, boilerplate cliches you can say that make you feel invincible. That is, nothing can prove you wrong. You are not inadequate. You will never feel inadequate again in your life. You have found the path. It doesn't matter the guy doesn't have to actually offer you a path. There doesn't have to be any content. Content would only get in the way. Really, all you're learning is just some cliches that you can say to anybody who challenges your path, your express train, that give you instant, immediate remedy, no possibility of feeling any kind of inferiority, any kind of outcastness. Even if you are an outcast, you'll still feel heroic, like you're on the right path. Imagine that someone came along and just gave you, it's a list of maybe, you could start with 15 cliches, boilerplate cliches. Some of them would be, they'd all amount to, well, I don't care. I'm above it. That's what they would all amount to. Some of them would be, I know you are, but what am I? That is, whatever someone challenges you with, you just flip it around. Some of them would be what I would call projection. It's projection in advance. You know, if you're a wolf, crying wolf is a great thing to do. That is, you can accuse someone else of being a wolf until people don't believe that there are wolves, and then you get to attack. So projection is basically accusing someone of what you're doing before they get a chance to accuse you. And so if they respond, well, you're that way, you can say, no, you're just being defensive. You know, I said it first, that kind of thing. So that's projecting. Okay, so that some of the boilerplate would be like that. A lot of the boilerplate would be related to that. There would be a way that you could say, well, you accuse me of this, and I'm accusing you of that, so it's a truce, or it's non-decidable, or the term itself, whatever I accused you of, whatever you accused me of, is meaningless because we all do it, because, you know, whatever. These are terms that are designed not for any content. The point is that they're generic. You can respond to any potential threat to your adequacy, any potential trigger that might fill you with fear of missing out, like I got on the wrong boat. It doesn't matter what the content is. You would just be given by this guy, granted by this guy, the toolkit for feeling confident, invincible, no matter what. And imagine if you got this and you were a human being. That is, a human being who's got language, who's totally reliant on language, and as a result can make idealizations and feel anxiety for not being at the ideal. So we can imagine an ideal self, a super me, and then recognize the ways I fall short of that. That's a kind of fear of missing out, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm saying we are Fomo sapiens, and that's a useful way to look at ourselves, to understand what we would crave, what we would desire, what we would fall for. What we would fall for to the point where we might actually forsake rule of law, rationality in our country here, just for that feeling that enough Americans, despite all of the prep and training we did to maintain the American vision of democracy, we the people, all of that, that you could have so many people, 40% of us, steer right towards someone who makes them feel invincible, gives them the toolkit for acting like they're invincible, and therefore are completely incorrigible, literally incorrigible, meaning that they cannot be corrected because they already know nothing could ever adjust their path because they already have the feeling like they're on the express train. So he gives them these cheap boilerplate cliches. They feel like they're on the express train to heaven because they feel invincible. And of course, if someone, and they feel that way because they got this toolkit for feeling invincible. And then if anybody ever challenges them, they use the toolkit to show that they are invincible, that nothing could ever change their minds, and they're proud of it. Heroic fake invincibility would be an appetite in humans. And the reason I bring this up, it's not partisan. I would say the same thing about someone who offered that toolkit who was a leftist or a religious person or a spiritual person, and there have been all of these varieties, and they are all the same. They do it the same way. They offer a set of, it's basically a bag of cheap tricks for feeling heroic, right, righteous, mighty, invincible, no matter what. It's a way of putting people to sleep as though they are on express trains to happily ever after, to heaven. And the reason that it would appeal to us is because we are Fomo sapiens.